Okay, so let's talk about some background here and how we got to where we are today. So the standard on revenue recognition was actually issued back in May 2014. So ASU 2014-09 for U.S. GAAP and IFRS 15 from the IASB. Now the standard is a principles-based model that applies to all industries. So today we have a lot of different industry-specific guidance out there. This new model is for all industries, so it's not going to, you're going to have similar answers to similar fact patterns regardless of what industry you're in. Now, there have been significant changes made since that standard was issued back in May 2014, and we'll talk about kind of the development or how those changes came about in the next slide. But essentially, what the FASB's done, they've spent quite a bit of time and made 4 updates, so 4 final ASUs. They also have a few proposed ASUs outstanding as of October 2016. And so those aren't as significant. So as you can see on the slide here, those relate to some corrections and improvements as well as some particular guidance when you have relating to non-financial assets. So the proposed ASUs will not have a huge impact on companies. So certainly if you have your companies or your clients at this point haven't started implementing the guidance, it wouldn't be something where they should be saying, well, we're going to wait till those final ASUs are issued. They should get started, if they haven't already, as soon as possible. Now, the IASB did not make as many changes as the FASB, so the standards were originally converged, but now there are some differences due to the fact the IASB didn't make all of the FASB's changes, and also some of the changes made by the IASB in their one amendment were not exactly the same as the FASB's in all cases. So the way some of these ASUs came about, the subsequent ASUs after the initial ASU 2014-09 was issued, was the boards, both the IASB and the FASB, set up what's called a Transition Resource Group, or the TRG. And the purpose of that group was they knew this was going to be a significant standard, so they wanted to make sure the transition was be as smooth as possible. So they wanted to give folks an opportunity to raise any issues or questions they have on the new standard to this group. So the group itself could not set standards, but what they do is discuss these issues and kind of look at it and say, well, do we think the standard is operable for the particular issues as stated, or we think there's some changes necessary. And if there are changes that they thought were necessary, they couldn't make those changes, but they'd make some recommendations to the FASB and the IASB, and then they would evaluate whether there were changes needed. So a lot of the ASUs that were subsequent ASUs that were issued were as a result of issues discussed by this Transition Resource Group. From the FASB standpoint, this group is still ongoing. Their most recent meeting was on November 7th. They've had 8 meetings to date. The IASB is actually not participating in these meetings anymore, so they're listening but not participating. So there could still be potentially more changes coming forward. I don't expect any significant changes, however. The one other thing to note here on this group is that they're actually, even in situations where they discuss issues and there are no updates, so no recommendations for the FASB to do anything, these issue papers and a summary of their discussion is out on the FASB's website. So while that information is not considered GAAP, it will be helpful to companies to know how this group kind of considered various issues and where they kind of where they fell out, or whether they thought there was no need for changes, why they thought that. So that there are some views from these papers that I think will be helpful for companies who face the issues that were raised in some of these meetings. Also, at the same time, since the standard was issued, the AICPA set up their own group. So they have industry-specific task forces regarding the new revenue recognition guidance. Rich mentioned earlier he's on one of these task forces. He's on the software task force. I'm on the overall revenue recognition working group, and so the way this works is their issues are discussed by these task forces, and then they are funneled through the revenue recognition working group to make sure they're going to be, that everyone's being consistent by industry, and ultimately they're approved by FinRec. So this guidance that will be issued is not authoritative guidance, because AICPA can't issue authoritative guidance. But again, it will be helpful for companies as they're implementing to consider this. So I mentioned earlier that this guidance is no longer industry-based. So one of the questions that can come up here is, well, why is the AICPA looking at this on an industry standpoint? So why do they have all these industry task forces? And the reason they do is because of a couple reasons. So one, industries today have, a lot of them have different revenue guidance. So their starting point for transitioning to the new guidance will differ. So depending on what industry you're in, there could be a larger or lesser impact. Also, obviously, each industry has their own different types of transactions. So these task forces are looking at those particular types of transactions, the significant ones, to evaluate how the new guidance should be applied to them. Now, there are quite a bit of issues discussed by these task forces. They have, as noted here, over 150 issues. 30-plus issues they've discussed and are out there for exposure and comment as of the end of October. Certain situations they have sent these issues to the TRG to discuss further. Now, ultimately, what the game plan is that they will have, the AICPA will issue a final revenue recognition guide. Again, non-authoritative, but helpful from an implementation standpoint. And they will also update all of their industry guides for these revenue issues. So, depending on the industry you're in, if you're or your clients are in, these are going to be very helpful for that industry looking at these particular papers when they're going about trying to implement the new guidance.